I hope everyone had a good day yesterday and a nice time at the reception. I want to special thanks to James and Heather for organizing that for us. And so that was outstanding. Really appreciate you guys doing that. So a couple of notes. Let's take a look at our agenda for the day. Right. So we have David Borak and his news and views. We have Mr. Jeff Griffin with us. This is Jeff's first time with the SSAB, I believe, so that'll be good. Public comment will be at 10:15. So if anybody would like to participate in public comment, we will pause what we're doing at 10:15 and make sure that time slot is available. And again, we are live streaming this across YouTube and around the world, so you can provide public comment via YouTube. And so that's available as well. Then we're going to spend a little time on product development. We have the two recommendations we want to take a look at, and then closing remarks, and then we'll get out of here. Earlier is better on that, right? So that's the plan. Okay, so since this is our first time with Jeff, and we're thankful to have him. And actually, we chose intentionally to do photos today because Jeff is better looking than Mark, so that worked well for. So that worked well. I'm just kidding. Mark's not watching this, is he? Right? So sure. All right. So what we want to do is make sure we do that. But in order to, so he knows you guys, we want to go around and do just short introductions again, who you are and where you're from at the table. So, Dave, you want to show them how we do this? You want to?
So my name's David Borak. I'm the designated federal officer for the SSAB.
Excellent. Doug?
Doug Howard, Vice SRS.
Gil Allensworth, Chair, Savannah Riverside.
Carlton K, Vice Chair Ports.
Bob Berry, Chair Ports.
Victoria Caldwell, Vice Chair Paducah.
Bill Murphy, Chair Paducah.
Dennis Wilson, Chair Oak Ridge.
Trilby McAfee, Chair Idaho Cleanup Project.
Stan Revealeth, Chair Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board.
Steve Rosenbaum.
And some of you may know this, but I actually was at Savannah River National Lab for 31 years. Retired, and I was an associate lab director for environmental management programs there, so I worked at many of the sites across the complex. Retired from them there in October, this last October, to take this position starting in November. So I moved from the contractor side and the national lab side basically over to the federal government side, and it's an interesting change, and I'm enjoying it still. I also obviously moved cities, so I still have a house in this area, so it's nice for the last night, and tonight I'll get to spend the night at night at my house, but then it's back to an apartment in DC. But anyway, happy to be here. I wanted to. We're going to go through this now, or?
Oh no, we'll go.
Okay. So anyway, I'm happy to be here, and look forward to talking to you.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. All right. First up on this morning's agenda, news and views. All right, Dave.
So I don't know how the news and views got started and why I have to do this every meeting, but I'll try. So a little trivia question for you guys. We had Take Your Kids to Work Day every year at DOE. It's a big event, and the Secretary's office puts on a huge show and gets all the kids walking around. And so the first, this was last year. I wasn't able to take them this year, but last year they had about 150 kids show up at DOE, and they were ages 8 to 18, and all. It was pretty neat. Well, we did a small survey they handed out at the beginning to the kids to say, well, what career do you want when you grow up? And 50% of the kids said this career. Does anyone know what that is? 50%.
Power Ranger?
That's a good guess.
Rapper.
YouTuber, which isn't an actual job.
It is?
It is.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, people make a lot of money.
You ever heard Ninja?
So I am excited that this is on YouTube and that I am a YouTuber. And that I don't know how, but according to my children, the money should come rolling in at this point. So I'm pretty excited. But I do want to, because they'll be watching this later because they watch a lot of YouTube, to Sam, Addie, and Eli out there.
That's just sad.
Stop watching YouTube. Just go outside, just for a little bit, please.
David,
It's a nice day.
I don't mean to burst your bubble. They won't be watching.
No. they might be watching this. I have a large following. Anyway, thank you all for being out here. I said yesterday, this is my favorite meeting of the year. I just want to point out, just saying that even out there.
Nice. I was helping you viewers.
We have an org chart in the package, which I sometimes neglect to put in there, and everyone always asks me for one. And so, just to understand any new changes, we don't have a lot of new changes from the last time we have. We have kind of the same basic organization we've had for a number of years. My office is still under EM4, which is the kind of the regulatory and policy affairs office. Betsy Connell, who used to be my boss, is now EM4, who used to be Mark Gilbertson, who is now EM2. So we've moved people around a little bit. And I mentioned yesterday that Linda Satora is now the acting director of my office for the intergovernmental and stakeholder programs, as well as the other office in my department, which is the regulatory compliance office. So not many changes sort of organization-wide. One of the changes for me that's a little bit interesting is they've asked me to be the DFO for the other advisory board that EM has, the EMAB, the Environmental Management Advisory Board. So it is congratulations, but also, there was no extra pay involved, and it's twice the job. So I don't know if congratulations are really in order. But it is an interesting board. It's very different from the SSAB board. There's a number of well-known people on that board. Paul DeBar, who's currently our undersecretary, used to be on EMAB. I met Carolyn Huntoon is on EMAB. She was the first EM1. She's a lovely woman and had amazing stories to tell. And Tracy Mustin is on that board, and she used to be EM2, and Jim Rispoli used to be EM1, and there's just a number of people on that board. And I just wanted, because you folks often ask about that board, and so there's two charges that board has that they're working on this year, and I wanted just to tell you about them. One is their charge is to accelerate on from DOE on some of the work that we're doing in sort of getting to closure, maybe coming up with some reuse guidelines and future land use ideas. So that's an interesting charge that they're working on. And I should say they just got started on these charges, so they really haven't done much research yet. And the other charge is sort of an organizational charge for EM. They're looking at building a sustainable EM organization with skills to ensure readiness for future challenges. So they're looking deep into sort of the EM organization, which is something that EMAB traditionally has done more than the EMSSAB, because they're more of a corporate board. They're looking at looking sort of within EM and sort of our organizational structure. And they have a lot of people who are former EM management on that board, so it kind of makes sense for them to take a look at it. I wanted to talk about future meetings. For the first time in a long time, we actually have our future chairs meetings planned out well. I know some of you are going off the board, or you may not be chair, but just to tell you about where our next meetings are. Our next meeting is going to be at the end of October in Sun Valley, Idaho, and the folks from Idaho are here, and they're working hard to plan that meeting, and I'm pretty excited about it. We've never had a chairs meeting in Sun Valley before, and Sun Valley's a great place in the winter, but when you go during what they call mud season, you're able to get the government rate. But even though it's not going to be ski season, it should be very nice out there. We should be able to get a lot of work done. And we came up with the idea when we noticed that I noticed that Idaho Falls is over here, and the site's over here, and then Sun Valley's over here. So it's not too much further west of the site. So it's not going to be too much of a drive. But they'll have a bus that'll take us all to the site for a tour. And then spring of 2020, the folks from Nevada have agreed to host our meeting. We don't have a date for that yet or any information, but we'll have that. And then fall 2020 is going to be in Santa Fe, and the folks from New Mexico are going to host us for that meeting. So stay tuned for that, and I will, after this meeting, a little bit after, once we get all the minutes done, we'll host a planning call to talk about planning for the fall meeting in Idaho, and everyone's welcome to participate on that, and we'll talk about agenda and recommendations that we might have and that kind of thing. I just want to say thanks to the folks from Savannah River for hosting an amazing meeting. It's really the way how organized that tour was picking us up and taking us all around and dropping us off, and then just this hotel worked out so well, and it ended up being a really kind of a perfect meeting. So there's a high bar for future meetings after this one, and especially after I planned the last one in DC, and it was so horrible that I feel like this really kind of makes up for that. James. Thank you.
No, it wasn't.
Well, thank you.
Really, it was great.
And that was it. We usually, I think, I neglected to put an evaluation in here. So, is it in there? Okay. So if you get a chance, fill out the evaluation. Let us know what worked, what didn't work. We take a look at that, and it helps us in planning our next meeting. Questions on anything, Susan? Please.
Shocking.
No, please.
I don't actually have a question. I have an observation.
Okay.
He was asking me questions about how I believe our board feels about that, and she expressed to me that many of the EMAB board members found it incredibly valuable to meet with the EMSSAB. And now that you're the DFO of both, there may be an opportunity for that to happen again.
Maybe. That was
Because there is an element of a broader stakeholder community in their first charge rather than just stovepiped in another direction. So
I was really surprised last year that I found like that was the first time that it had ever happened.
Yes.
Where the two boards had met at the same time and had the same meeting. They sometimes had parallel meetings, but never had a joint meeting, which is what we had last time.
And we found it very valuable, as did many of them, and I think it was valuable to the Department of Energy because they brought a wider perspective and would bring a wider perspective to this first charge. So, a suggestion.
Thank you.
Dennis, did you have a question?
Yes. What is the schedule for the email? Do they move around site to site just like we do, or?
So it's a good question. Historically, they have met once. They usually have 2 meetings a year, once at a site and once at in DC.
Okay.
That generally is how they've done it in the past. Our site offices do. So if she wants to have another meeting of EMAB, we can just have another meeting of EMAB. So sometimes they might even have 3 meetings a year if they find the need for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the org chart.
Please.
And maybe it's a question for Jeff. Who does SR&L policy office answer to? So the way it looks on the chart is like they're above.
Yeah, let me make sure I'm looking. So technically, right now, it does report up through 3. But at this point, I'm recused from dealing with SR&L, having just come from there. Now, will be for a year, so until next November. So we're actually running that through EM4 right now, and Ming Zhu of EM4 is acting as the interface point, if you will.
So, field operations update. Mr. Griffin, sir, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. How do we move the slide? Oh, okay. I didn't notice that. All right, so as I said,
Actually, I think you just say next to that young lady right there.
okay. Thank you. So as I said earlier, I'm happy to be here. What I wanted to do is just kind of walk through a number of different things that are going on. First, before I get into that, so I'm the Associate Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Field Operations, so that we call it APDAS, or just short EM3. And most people think, well, field operations just means, doing work in the field, and that's true to an extent, but actually the work in the field gets done by the site offices primarily. Site managers do report to me, but a lot of what we do at headquarters in EM3 is really kind of a little bit broader. It's really about kind of extending sort of the vision that EM1 brings in and the direction that the department's trying to go, trying to make sure that we can do that across the whole complex, the whole EM complex consistently. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is exactly what this said at the top, ensuring that EM priorities are reflected in site priorities. The sites get their funding, it goes direct to the sites. It doesn't, Steve Trishman talked yesterday about the budgets and all that, but the sites actually have the money. So we just try to make sure that we kind of, how we work and how we do that. Any discussion of that yesterday?
A little bit.
Okay. And I'll do a little bit, and I apologize in advance if it's redundant with what you heard yesterday, but then consistency and contract accountability and some things we're doing like that. Some one slide on safety, security, and QA changes as we move forward. Technology development, that Office of Technology Development does fall in EM3. And then the opportunities for accelerating work. And then there's just a couple of picture slides on expected accomplishments, most of which I'm sure you're already familiar with. So next slide, please. So the InState Contracting, and again, this is where I apologize if I'm duplicating something that was said yesterday, but the InState Contracting is a new contracting approach that we've implemented just in the past few months with the first request for proposals coming out. The first 2 in-state contracts that will be placed will be at Hanford, the Central Plateau closure contract and the tank closure contract. And those RFPs, or requests for proposals, went out on Valentine's Day. So a little love note to industry, I think. And then the proposals have come in and they're in the evaluation stage right now. The thing about this that's significant and different, and the reason it's important and worth mentioning, is that this is, if you're familiar, and most of you are quite familiar with the EM business processes over the years, our contracts have taken a very, very, very long time to get out on the street, then to do the evaluations, and then make the awards, and we've had a lot of difficulties with that. And then even when we're in the contracts, we've had historically some challenges because what are these specific objectives that we're going to work toward? And these things, these negotiations, these step 2 negotiations, then will be part of the process for the next 10 years. I mean, we do, it's called an IDIQ, indefinite, indefinite, I forgot what the D is for, but, and then indefinite quantity.
Delivery?
Huh?
Definite
Delivery, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. So it's basically task orders. But we're going to be placing large task orders over a period that can be 1 year or 3 or 4 or 5 years, but that will be a defined scope of work. But we'll be negotiating that after having made the award, and we'll be doing that multiple times through the life of the contract. The point is with this that we can actually, through that, we can adapt to changes in budget, changes in the technical issues that we discover at a particular site, changes in regulatory requirements, changes in the community's desires on in-states. Those things can all be built into that. Instead of just awarding a 10-year contract and then hoping that that's going to hold true for 10 years, we actually are forcing a sit down and go through this over and over, multiple times over the 10-year period. And we can even award a task order at year, 9 years and 11 months and 29 days in, that's for another 5 years. So technically you can have a 15-year contract out of this. So this is the approach that we're taking now with this in-state contracting. And I think it is going to be a real game changer for us, that we're trying to go back and capture some of the positive things that we saw in the past, where we were actually able to focus on closing and getting to closure and completion at some sites like Rocky, Mount Vernal, that sort of thing. We really want to try to kind of change the dynamic and get some, an approach in place that will allow us to really move things along instead of just, keep working and working and working and not seeming to get anywhere or not making the kind of progress and the focus on the end states that we feel like we need. So that's what that is. And it was developed with a consideration of industry feedback. So it's a big change for us. Next slide, please. So as I said, right now we have the Central Plateau and the tank closure contracts at Hanford that are actually out. The proposals are in, and so we're working through that. We're on track for a July award for both of those. And then there'll be a transition period, I believe, on those two. It's a 60-day transition period. that brings us in line with the current end of the current contracts for both of those in the September timeframe. We're readying the Nevada InState contract, the Oak Ridge, Idaho's lined up. We've got the Portsmouth D&D, and right now West Valley is in a little bit of a flux as to whether it will be doing that or whether we'll be doing it at this stage or whether we'll push it out a little bit. So we're kind of working back and forth on that. And then Savannah River, this slide was made before that was on Savannah River. Now we'll have it as well because we have the EM piece of the mission, and we're starting to see when we closed down the liquid waste contract process that was going on because we needed to rescope it. So we're going to have an EM and more of a enduring piece, which would include the tritium operations in the national lab. So that doesn't show up on this list, but it is also being worked. So that's sort of the direction that we're going with the contracting world. Roughly 50% of our contracts, on that list represents probably about 50% or so. So there's a few that aren't near-term in-state contracts. And for all those contracts that we're not changing right now, we continue to have what we call PEMPs, or Performance Evaluation Measurement Plans. And those represent a really important annual effort and negotiation between the contractor and the department. So these offer a real opportunity for us to sort of, even without changing the contract directly, to sort of set a focus on certain achievements. So we've been going through all the PEMPs that we have in place. We negotiate those typically from about April or so and get them in place by the end of the fiscal year. So we really want these locked down in July. But we've gone through all the ones that are in place for this current year, and we're now in the stage of negotiating, or starting to negotiate the ones for 20. So this is the time that we want to be kind of feeding forward, trying to focus on completion, getting things done, getting to end states as much as possible, making sure that, as I said earlier, that we're aligned with the priorities and principles for our in-state contracting and managed appropriately. We want to be rewarding. The PEMPs define what we're going to reward from the contractor, so we want to be rewarding those things that advance the program and move us further down the road, get things cleaned up. So, and we need to have that reward to be appropriate to what the work represents within the contract. We are updating these to account for incremental scope increase, of course, going through all of this, and then we're looking at the effectiveness of the contractor assurance system, which is sort of the CAS is the overarching program that the contractor has in place to assure safety and quality and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. We're also, as part of this, it's part of improving the consistency of operation across the entire Office of Environmental Management. We've been going through and looking at the fee awards. Now, the site managers are typically what we call the fee determining officials that actually determine the fee for the contractor based on the criteria that are in place. And this is an advisory board because we're not taking away that fee determination, but what we're trying to do is have each of the site managers or them and their staff present their rationale for the fees that they're recommending for the and proposing to give to the contractors. And we just talk through that, and we're trying to, and this is something that will kind of accumulate over time, but we're trying to get sort of a consistent approach that allows us to be better partners with the contractors so that we have similar, every contract is slightly different, every contractor, every site manager is different, but we're trying to get to a more consistent basis for operations with the contractors so that they understand how we're thinking and how we're approaching about certain things. So we're trying to get away from hard graders and easy graders and trying to get to just a consistent way of doing that. This takes time. I mean, you have to have these discussions over time. So we started this about 4 or 5 months ago, and we're accumulating through the discussion and all that. But the discussion itself does help because we have other site managers involved in the discussion. So you start to see things kind of starting to come together over time. Next slide, please. In the safety, security, and quality assurance area, several initiatives there. Dave Chung, who works in EM3, is doing a lot of great work in this area, and he's been in EM for many, many years. He's been EM2, he's been EM3, he's been, I think, in almost every position except perhaps Dave. I don't know. So, but he's sort of leading this, and so I'll give a lot of credit to him on this. But as we go into the upcoming contracts, we're trying to make sure that we don't have a lot of, and I say unnecessary, and I know that raises people's eyebrows, but the thing is, we clearly want to be focused on safety. I mean, that's an expectation. You know, the first expectation for all of our contractors is for all of us. But we're also looking at things like, are we maintaining something that we don't need to do that doesn't represent a change in conditions? EM is, a lot of times we have changed from, Paducah is a prime example. I was there this week. It changed from operations that occurred in 2013, and so it's now transitioning toward a demolition and all that. So they're kind of working through the deactivation and all that. Those are changing conditions, and how you operate it as an operational facility is quite different than what you do during deactivation, which is quite different than what you do in demolition. So we're just trying to look at that and make sure that we're doing this appropriately. As I mentioned earlier, we are working with the contractors, actually partnering with them and doing some contractor assurance system reviews. So Day has actually pulled together a team with contractor involvement and has gone to a couple of sites so far, trying to look at how the companies implement their CAS systems and how the field offices interface with them, so that we're trying to, again, we always say this and the contractors tend to roll their eyes, but the ideal is we want to manage the contract, set the expectations, and then of course we're paying the contractors quite a bit of money to actually execute the contract. So how do we achieve the appropriate level of oversight and interface between the field offices and the contractors? And again, it goes back to trying to get to a more consistent approach and learn how we can best do that. But it obviously depends on the quality of the contractor and their assurance systems and that sort of thing. Dave's first visit was at SRS, actually, I think back in March, might have been early April. And I believe he's made one other one since then, but I can't recall which one it was. And then we've been working hard to start doing some lessons learned and best practices in safety and quality assurance across the entire EM complex. Next slide, please. Shifting gears a little bit, technology development program. I think most of you probably know what this is, but there's actually a separate account that Congress budgets for technology development for EM. For the last few years, it's typically been on the order of $25 million. In fact, for 19, it was $25 million in appropriations, which isn't really that much if you think about it from an R&D perspective for a program that's $6.5 to $7 billion. That's not a whole lot of money in that arena. Out of that 25 for 19, 16 was congressionally directed to certain activities. $5 million Idaho to work across the complex for nuclear material disposition efforts. Some to just various sources like that. So there's really only about 9 or so that actually is open to just going and doing the things that need to be done. But one of the things that I've always thought, and I've been involved in the technology development program for a number of years, probably about 12 years or so, when I was on the laboratory side of things. And one of the things I've always thought is that we just need a more robust program management process. We really don't have a very good process, or I didn't feel like we had a great process consistently over the years in terms of selection of the projects, the prioritizations, and the portfolio management. When do you get out of something if it's not working? We don't tend to do that. Some things tend to, just have perpetual motion and keep going. And the other thing is, as you look at priorities across the EM complex, you really need to be working. This kind of program really can't be a largely academic exercise. It can't be something that's just devoted to developing science. I mean, science is important, and basic research is really important. But this particular program is a technology development program, not a basic science program. So trying to make sure that we keep this in line and focused on, EM's priorities, that we're doing things that are lined up with EM's needs over the next few years as opposed to 20 years down the road when conditions could have changed dramatically. So I've had Kurt Gerdes of my organization is running this program now, and I've asked Kurt to go visit each site, and he visited Savannah River 2 weeks ago. He's going to Hanford in June, I think, first week of June, and then he's got a number of other visits. But go to each site and take a good look at not only what are we doing with this particular pot of funding, but also what are we doing in terms of technology development at each site that's funded by the site and or the contractors at the site. Not trying to change or catch anything. What I want to try to do though is get a view of what is really going on, where are we spending the money, and just ultimately we want to make sure that we are focused on those things that actually deliver, that we're investing this money to deliver results that can impact EM's priorities, which is closing sites, getting things cleaned up and closing sites. So that's, takes me down there. The other thing, it takes me down to almost the last bullet there, but the other thing that is we just had at the beginning of March, I believe, we had a report out by the National Academy's independent assessment on technology development. And so we are, they also told us we needed to have a better program management process. They had several other recommendations. I think they were of interest to us, so we'll be taking a good look at that. We don't know where the budget request, Steve might have touched on yesterday, is only about $10 million for this next year. And we don't know where Congress will come out, so we'll have to wait and see how that works on that. So next slide, please. And then lastly, in terms of the things I wanted to explicitly talk about, I think Steve Trishman might have talked about this yesterday, but we've been conducting what we call an options or alternatives analysis, or some people might call it an art of the possible analysis at different sites. Ann's challenge to the site managers back a number of months ago was, think about how you could get done at your site in 10 years or less. The thing is, of course, that's a challenge, especially somewhere like Hanford or even Savannah River, but at least be thinking about this. What does that look like? What does it take to get there? So we've been working, the site managers and EM3 staff and EM4 staff have been working through this, looking at opportunities for accelerating site closure. The impacts are things like sequencing of cleanup activities, potential means of reducing environmental liabilities. Obviously, we're going to obey all the laws. We have regulatory agreements in place. We have financial issues. So there are a lot of constraints on this. But if you don't think outside the box sometime about what the possibilities are, then you never find anything outside the box. And sometimes these things that you think of that are outside the box can be brought inside the box that you're operating in. So that's what we're trying to do with this. We are just now getting everything together where we can actually look at it. It could help us inform some of our priorities, in terms of future years, how we might try to line things up. It could, for instance, inform how we want to accelerate some sites' shipments to WIP. So we're trying to look at all that right now. We do not have it all together. I'd hope to have it together by the end of April, but we do not yet. We are, Ann is highly focused on having some input from the public. We're trying to work through how we can do that, because some of this stuff would have an impact on procurements, and so it could be a little bit sensitive in that arena. So we're trying to do this in a way where we can actually get, trying to come up with a way to actually get, input from the public that's actually actionable and and meaningful. And we're going to come up with something on that, and Linda Satora over here has been leading that effort to do that in parallel to our analysis of this. And of course, once we come up with our proposed approach, and we're very close on that now, we have to work through the legal side of DOE and all that to make sure that we're doing something that doesn't impact future procurements. That's one of the concerns that we would have right now, probably one of the bigger ones at this stage. Next. So I'm not going to spend much time on this. In fact, we can just kind of just touch on a couple of things. So, I think the next 2 or 3 slides are just kind of a focus on Some of the things that we have actively underway in 2019, WIP, for instance, we're working very hard on the underground ventilation system, because that's the controlling factor at WIP to be able to do work, is to be able to have enough air to do all the work you need to do. And it's an active living place that changes day by day by day. And so if you're not doing something with it, then those conditions, that's the whole reason we're using WIP, is that, that putting stuff in the salt is the salt does eventually close in. And so you have to be active with that. So we're working on that. Monitoring well at Los Alamos, Spru, and Moab next. We have now operational the tank closure season removal ion exchange set up at Savannah River. Richland, we're moving forward with a demolition on the PFP. Oak Ridge, K1037, scheduled completion later this year. Savannah River, solid waste processing facility, got the coal feeds area, but also moving toward full operations there. And Idaho, I don't think I have it on here, but we're doing the testing for IWTU. In fact, we're in the middle, we're about 30 days, and 29 or 30 days into the 50-day test. That it's going quite well so far and gives us pretty good hope for this. And I better knock on wood here somewhere for that. And then the effluent management system at ORP. Next one. Is that last one? Okay. So now I see there. How does this work?
So,
Do you have questions? Let's start with, we'll go with Shelley and then over to Susan and work our way around the table.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate your presentation. Shelley Simone, Hanford Advisory Board. I've got a number of questions. Because I didn't hear you say anything about risk and reduction, and that being part of the focus, and also
About what? I'm sorry.
risk reduction
Risk reduction.
and compliance agreements, and how those would still be drivers for these contracts that
Oh, absolutely.
will
I
be
mean, so
developed. So I'm curious how that gets tied in. I'm also curious about how this is going to get codified so that the public can understand it, that it's a transparent process. And one of the recommendations that came from the National Academies of Science was some kind of database informed formal process that was accessible, or a platform that is accessible to the public, as well as scientists and people in the industry, and I'm curious about the thought on that recommendation. So.
Okay, so on the risk reduction and compliance piece of that, so with the InState Contracting, as we go into that, that's going to be a heavy focus of the discussion and what we call, as I said, the step 2. And I'm not trying to be into the slang of it and all that, but that's just a way to think about it. So post-award, that's where we're going to have, it's going to be a lot of ongoing negotiations that we expect will involve regulators as well, between the contractors, the department. Perhaps there'll be, voice from the regulators. And one of the suggestions that was made to us recently, which I think is quite good, and we got to figure out exactly how to do this, but before, when we did contracts awards and the prior type things, we'd have community days and industry days before the contract. Well, now we're in this new process where we have this kind of ongoing negotiations for different IDIQ task orders as you go through the contract. So one of the suggestions made is, well, would we not have multiple community days post-award, to kind of engage the community, where things are going, what we're focusing on, how things might shift from year to year to year. So that was just in the last week or two. That suggestion was made actually from somebody associated with Savannah River, but I actually think that's a pretty good approach. Now, how we actually do that, we've got to work through that, but I think that offers an opportunity to actually, okay, this is, we're now putting together an approach to handle this particular thing, and it's a risk, it's our biggest risk. We really want to knock that one down. How do we go about doing that? What does that end state look like? And the compliance agreements, of course, that's going to be a major piece of all our involvement, our negotiations, involvement in the negotiations. I mean, we got to meet those. We got to do everything we can to meet those, and we will. And that's going to be a big part of the discussion. What is it we're going to be trying to accomplish, and where does it got to be accomplished by? So, The second piece, I'm sorry, would you repeat that? The second question that you had?
Well, I'm curious, one of the recommendations from the National Academy of Sciences was to build some kind of formal database that substantiates best practice decisions, and I wondered, then that was accessible to the public, so.
Yeah. So that's something we're, among the things that we're looking at. I don't have, exactly what we're going to do yet. We're still working through some of that. But I think, with those kind of things, I've always had this belief that there's value in doing it and it's important, but then it ends up being something you got to maintain. And so you end up, you try to find this sweet spot of let's have this database and get it shared and constantly talk about it, and yes, the transparency is really important. We're trying to get to where we can actually have these things out there and maintain that on a routine basis, but I don't have a defined point for that just yet. So
I think what it does is supports the idea that they also had that we haven't kept, EM has not kept track of technologies that were tried and that did not reach maturation, and you're destined to possibly repeat those kinds of exercises to no avail.
Right.
And it makes sense to get some kind of database together.
And we actually have had efforts in the past from the National Lab standpoint to try to, I know this from being on the National Lab side of things, to actually try to compile these kinds of things. But then you also, when you create this, you also got to get people to know about it and use it. So you have to create it in some kind of space where people can be aware of it and reference it. So that it's like having a set of books that could provide a lot of information on the bookshelf at home, but you just need to know it's there so you can go look at it. And so that's been one of the things we've always struggled with. We've taken a couple of efforts. If I go back 7 or 8 years, I remember us trying to do that, and we did that. We did it in a robotics area. The other thing is trying to create the way people are trying to think about it, the way people will think about it, so that then we can, they think, oh, I need to go take a look at that. So we've had mixed, I'd say mixed success, but it's probably leans toward the less successful than you'd like. So.
Thank you.
Let's go Susan, and then we'll jump around to Doug. And Bill, did you have anything? Or we'll come back to you in a minute.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate this. As you can imagine, those of us at Hanford were a bit concerned when you talked about closure contract, because currently the work is planned to go out through almost the end of this century. So a 10-year closure contract was a little scary. But I was given to understand yesterday, or we all were given to understand, that it would be closure of a particular task. Right. At those sites, ours particularly, that do not have agreed to end states yet, that the way that you communicate what that means is going to be very important.
That's a really, really good point.
There's no question about that. The stakeholders are very concerned.
Right.
That's really more of an observation than anything. And I have 2 actual questions. Who is on the fee advisory board? You talked about the contractors helping you design this contracting scheme, however you want to title it, and you talked about the art of the impossible listing. What are the assumptions? The assumptions that the analysis ends up using really speaks to the validity of the analysis. So will those be publicly available, those assumptions? Because sometimes they're more aggressive or really not as realistic as they ought to be.
Right. Okay, so first question, fee advisory board is federal folks only. I mean,
okay.
So the contractors, in the sense of going to the InState Contracting, there was sort of the voice, if there is such a thing, it was input from the contractors over a period of time that the previous approach wasn't working as well as we'd like, and we
like
had evidence.
FCOG?
Yes, right. But the fee advisory board is federal folks only. It's made up of some headquarters people as well as some site managers, and it is just that. An advisory board is just kind of collecting and helping us share information among different sites and all that, so that we at least understand how we're operating. and can strive toward more consistency on that. With regard to the alternatives analysis, yes, we intend, as part of this thing, we do the assumptions. The basic assumptions at the highest level, and I've got to say that we recognize that Hanford and Savannah River are exceptions to this, but the basic statement was, how do you get out of your site in 10 years? And so you have a baseline now that goes to whenever it goes to for each site. And we said, well, if you were unconstrained, now that means different things to different people, but if you're unconstrained, what could you do? And then we said, but that's unrealistic, but at least think of it from that, start from that standpoint. That's getting outside the box. And then you've got to be, a more realistic that recognizes the legal and regulatory constraints that you have in place. We did allow them some freedom on money, though, because you got to, otherwise you're right back to the baseline, right? So we said, okay, if you're now you bring those constraints in, but you start thinking about if you could do this funding-wise, if you could change the sequencing of work, how would that impact things?
One last question. You talked about open book negotiations. Is that open book between the department and the contractors only, or open book so that the public is aware of how these negotiations go forward as you determine the tasks?
Oh, it's between the contractor and the department, because they're now signatories on the, at that point they'll be joined together in a contract. They'll be actually in the contract.
Okay.
And so.
Okay.
But
So only
what
the
I meant
results.
by that, though, is actually you're now already partners. You're trying
Right.
to figure out what the next scope of work is, what's the cost of that scope of work, what's the fee for that scope, and what's the schedule for that. So
Okay.
you're working through that kind of process. And so there's some proprietary stuff that'll come in from the contractors, right, on
Okay.
that stage.
Okay.
But the sense is, as opposed to the current approach, which is to say, give us a proposal for how you're going to do work over the next 10 years and what it's going to cost and what the fee's going to be. We'll just now be breaking it into little pieces after we're already under contract.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Doug, we have about 20 minutes before we need to break for public comment, so, Chief, sir.
Go ahead, the whole 20 minutes.
You take, you related to Gil.
Doug
aren't you?
Howard, Savannah River. Good morning. Jeff, thanks for the presentation. The question I have is, EM has been in business for a while. Why has it taken so long to come to this mindset of InState, to a culture of completion? I mean, it seems like this should have been on the mind years ago, that this is what we want and this is what we want to be our focus.
Well, I can't disagree. It's kind of a hard question to answer, right, about why things, but we actually did do, we have closed sites, right? I mean, we used to have 116 and now we've got 117 or whatever, and now we have 16 left. So we have made progress on this. The thing is, you tend to, and the initial focus is sort of worked off the easy things, the easier things. I don't think any of them are easy. And it's a very complex effort. I mean, these are not easy tasks at all. I mean, what do you do? What's the safe thing to do with waste that's in tanks? And what's an ultimate disposition path? How long can you leave it in the tanks? How do you manage that? How do we deal with groundwater contamination? And so some of these things are very, very challenging. And in fact, I think in the early days, we didn't realize how challenging it was. I mean, you just don't know until you start doing it. And every one of these, even Hanford versus Savannah River, you say, well, waste tanks, they had the nuclear materials, the separation processes and all that, and the canyons or separation areas. But they're very, very, very different from each other. So you end up with first of a kind. Everything's almost first of a kind. So significant technical challenges. And I think sometimes the scale and the length of this, when you talk about, going to the next century, that's hard for people to grasp. And so then you think of your career, or your portion of your career that you're spending on something that's still going to take another, if you think of it as taking another 50 or 60 or 70 years, and you may be working on it for 20 or 15, a portion of your career or something like that. It's really hard to get to, like, I'm going to make a decisive bite into that, you know, it's more like, I'm just gonna keep it going, you know, just keep working it and all that. And I think that probably the biggest thing we're trying to do with this is, and the biggest thing Ann's trying to do with this is bring in a mindset that we need to be working toward completing this stuff. Even if it is gonna be 20 or 30 years out, we need to take bites out of that apple and, you know, make big steps and get things done. And that's a big challenge. It's real easy to kind of slip into, I'll just keep the machine running kind of thing. And I don't think people are consciously trying to do that. I think it's just, you know, it's just trying to reset the focus so that we need to be completing this work. We've got to get at these waste tanks were not designed to last for 150 years. You know, but at that time in the country, it was like, oh, we just need to get this going. We need to make the weapons. And so now we're faced with a reality. So, you know, I don't know that that's a good answer. I'm not sure I have a good answer, but so I think that, you know, we've actually done some of these closures, but then we kind of got caught up in some of the technical challenges. And I think what happens is sometimes you go, okay, I need to get this particular process running and this particular process running. And that, while that's advancing things, you kind of lose track of, well, we could be still, you know, go back to the risk reduction. We should be tackling these other risks, and we can be knocking those off the list.
So you think the public outcry has a part in that also, in you know, making that be the focus of EM, is getting things done now?
Do I think the public outcry is what now?
Has played a part in that demand to get things done?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, that the public impacts us in a lot of ways, right? I mean, there's a public outcry, there's the public engagement with EM, there's also engagement through Congress or, you know, delegations, a number of different mechanisms, of course, that influences the program and how you do this.
Okay, thank you.
Good deal. Bill?
Bill Murphy in Paducah. Jeff, thank you very much. And if you were in Paducah recently, you probably are aware that dispute resolutions between DOE and federal and state regulators doesn't even let the contractor get started until much later than they anticipated. So in the in-state contracting situation, is there anything that can be done to help expedite those type of disputes and get things actually started?
I think all I want to say about that is that, yes, I'm well aware of that, and we're working, you know, trying our best to work through it as in the mechanisms we have available to us. I think from a public standpoint, you know, it's obviously helpful to have the input from the public, whichever way that goes, but at least we need to understand where the public is with it. So, you know, continue talking to us.
Thanks. All right, Stan, and then we'll come over to Gil.
Stan Revealeth, Northern New Mexico cab. As I made clear yesterday, I know you weren't here, that we certainly think that having a 10-year vision is a good idea, because I think it can help stimulate public support for the program, and it gives an incentive to our legislators to work as hard as they can to support that program. So we think that it makes good planning as well as political as well as planning sense. But my question is, why wasn't Los Alamos on that list of in-state contractors?
Well, a real simple reason is that contract just was started, what, a year ago, so it's not due in this period of time. However, it certainly, the PIMP discussion that I had and all that very heavily applies to that, and we're actively having discussions with Doug Hensey about that as we go forward. But it's not a contract that's going to be awarded anytime in the near future. That's all of those on that list there are within the next year.
But as I understand it, you wanted to build in the in-state task mechanism within the existing contract. Is that no longer possible with N3B?
It won't be exactly the same approach because it's not that kind of contract, but we can do a lot of changes to it, and we've already or in the midst of having discussions with, as I said, the site and the contractor about how we can do that.
So you mean we're not excluded from that?
No.
Mechanism.
It's just that it's not technically one of the near-term awards. So I'm sorry I didn't make that clear when I said that. But
Thank you.
having just been awarded and, a little bit over a year ago, and really now getting up and running pretty clearly. So.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate your question. Gil?
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Everything you're saying. The fee advisory board. You've explained it. I get it. Just in Savannah River, in our community, a change in contractor. We talk to people who work on the site. And they're like, well, it's just a changing a paycheck. I mean, my paycheck comes from somebody else, but it's a big deal to the community outside the fence. So I don't know what the other sites have. I mean, I know we have a liquid waste contract and we have the M&O contract. So as I hear about the advisory board, and it sounds like it's just, correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit more accountability to the sites of making sure we're grading properly. Was a discussion ever had? I mean, so if we're trying to do that, would it make more sense for headquarters just to have a review board for it instead of an advisory board, or what's? I mean, I'm kind of confused. What other than just creating a situation? And the reason I'm asking is because changing the contractor is such a big deal. And if they get graded poorly by headquarters, but local thinks they're doing a great job, what's that do?
Well, we're not rating them separately. I mean, so all we're really trying to do with this is make sure we have a good discussion with the site and headquarters, and we have the engagement of other site managers, just so we have different perspectives on all this. But we're just trying to have a good discussion about the site manager, who is officially the fee determining official usually at the site. How are they grading? How are they considering things if they have a technical safety requirement violation or something like that? How much do they mark off for that on their contractor, and why? What's the rationale behind that?
Manager?
No, we're not looking to do that.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Are there additional questions for Jeff? Yeah, Shelley.
Thank you. I'm curious, this morning at breakfast, we talked about, so which site would we see come off the books first? And
Hanford.
Don't we wish? I once joked with Jim Rispoli that someday it'd just be he and I at the table. Or our counterparts, meeting somewhere. And that was a little sobering to think about in terms of the challenges of getting funding. But and I was thinking Los Alamos, would be the most likely, and yet we don't see it on the list. So are there discussions within EM about, can we get this, because EM always has a goal of showing Congress success.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
That's a good question. We're actually kind of working through some of that right now. There are some good candidates. Los Alamos, despite not being on that list, and I should have made clear that list was the near-term awards of where it'll be officially InState Contract. So I apologize for not making that clear from the very beginning. But that doesn't mean that something can't be finished up in the current contract, even if it's not an InState contract. Because as I said, we're going to try to shift things around and try to focus on that. That was always been the plan. We're just kind of changing the focus for some of these things we go forward, and we're trying to look at sequencing so that we can, and we're still working through that. What you hate to have in some of these cases, and I won't get too specific here, but if you're changing contracts right in the middle of a really big push on some particular piece of work, that can be, sometimes you have to, but that can really be kind of problematic. And so you try to look at how you can set things up, and then get the next contract to be the one that as Ann would say, is done. But no, I can't simply answer that. Oh, this will be one of the first or whatever. So.
Susan.
And thank you. Your presentation is really interesting, and I do hope we get a hard copy of that because it will be very helpful to share with our boards as we go back home. I'm looking at your presentation and my notes, and I didn't see an intersection between stakeholders, including boards, as well as the public, as you determine tasks throughout the contract. When you talked about your negotiations, is there an intersection somewhere about You know, do you get my, I mean, does that make sense?
Yes, that our vision is that as you end up in the step 2 of the in-state contracts and all that there is there's an intersection, to use your term, between the stakeholders and what we're working on. It goes back to the risk reduction and the priorities and all that sort of thing. As I said, one of the advantages I think of the in-state contracting, if you look at it, if you award, and so now you're in a 10-year partnership with the contractor and all that, but you have a forcing function that forces you to sit down. That's the task that you have to develop, the task orders that you have to develop, a forcing function that forces you to sit down and negotiate. What are we going to go after next? And I think there's got to be a mechanism. You already have mechanisms, your boards and all that, or one of those, but for community input, I think the communities really have to help us understand what those endpoints, end states, really look like ultimately, right? I mean,
I think so.
It's all about, what are you going to use it for? I know we had some interesting discussions with some of the folks from the UK, and I hadn't really thought of it this way, but they made the point there that they don't really talk about end states, they just talk about the next state, because they decided that in the UK, basically there's almost no plot of land that hasn't been, over the centuries, been used multiple times for many different purposes. So when they get out of something, it's not about what is it going to be forever and ever, but what's it going to be next. And then there's another next and another next beyond that, so things are just going to change. I mean, there's not one piece of land there that hasn't been walked on and used for something somewhere. So that kind of perspective, is really kind of I think might be useful from a community standpoint here too, so what do we want the next use, and then what comes after that. So.
I'm really glad to hear that, and I hope that dialogue continues throughout the length of the contract. I think it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, Gil, and then we'll jump over to Bob. We have about 5 minutes, and we need to pause for
Shelley
public
brought up Los Alamos, and I guess one of the things that's confusing from where I'm sitting at Savannah River site is we keep using end state, and which is great, it makes a lot of sense, but Los Alamos and Savannah River have enduring mission. And so we have both on site. So we keep saying end state. Now I understand it's for specific programs, but that gets confusing to our community at large. So we like end state, but we have no real end state because we have enduring mission.
Well, that's a really good point, and kind of echoes, I think, one that was made earlier. We need to be careful with the language that we use and how we talk about that. And so, that's a good point, and duly noted that we probably need to clean that up a little bit, or at least be a little more precise about that. So yes, in-state, we tend to talk about it in terms of a site, but the reality is it's what are we going to do with that particular issue, that whether it's contamination in groundwater or soil, or if it's tank waste or whatever, how are we going to get that to a safe in-state, with minimum risk, that sort of thing. So it's not obviously for Los Alamos or Oak Ridge even, it's not defining the entire site. I mean, it's meant to define the EM mission piece within that and components of that. You're right, I mean, Savannah River is an enduring mission in a couple of areas, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge. You got Pacific Northwest National Lab at Hanford, so you have a lot of these kind of things that kind of cloud that use that terminology. So good point. Thank you.
Bob?
Bob Berry, Portsmouth site. If you can tell me, have you had any discussions with the Portsmouth site on end use and transfer? With all respect to Los Alamos, we're hopefully ready for placement into our cell starting next year. 326 is almost cold and dark, hoping to have the first cell complete placement. We could certainly be done in 10 years with the amount of funding, or becoming a closure fund site. So I believe we would be the closest to completing our site. It's just a matter of funding, and if you've had any discussions, or if you can talk about those discussions about the Portsmouth site or the future use of the Portsmouth site. Thank you.
So, yeah, Portsmouth is on the list there. We are actively working through that, and that's one that speaks to, or it needs to be addressed through that sequencing thing that I talked about, in terms of like 326 and where that stands relative to the contract and all that. So we're working through some of that. It's working hard there to get everything lined up and moving forward as rapidly as possible, as you probably know, and you're right, it is a function of funding. So ultimately, all these things are ultimately,
course.
the ability to make progress there.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Jeff? We have just a second before public, like 2 minutes. You have a closing statement you want to make? Anything short or sweet that?
Well, yeah, short and sweet, okay.
No,
I appreciate the opportunity. I think the questions and the comments, I really appreciate those. I think those are useful. And, big takeaway for me was the terminologies that we're using, how we talk about these things. We need to work on that a little bit. Ann is highly committed, Ann White is highly committed to, increasing transparency and letting you see where we're trying to go with this. So I encourage you to keep reaching out to us and talking to us. And if you're in D.C. area and you want to stop by and visit, then please do. But that's all I have.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Can you go ahead and do it? All right, so we're going to go ahead and open up the public comment portion of the meeting. Again, if you are watching online and contributing to Dave Borak's future stardom, you can contribute public comment via either the comments on the YouTube page, or I think there's an email link. You can send those in. Thank you, Jeff. Are there any members of the in attendance that would like to provide public comment at this time? All right, seeing none.
And the only one who's watching on YouTube is me. And I have a lot of comments, but you don't want to.
Yeah. Nice. I like it. So when you get paid, we all get a cut, right?
Absolutely.
We all get equal shares in this. All right.
Over
Giving
25,000
yourself
views.
good reviews.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a break. We're going to get a little ahead of schedule. Let's take a break. Let's come back at,
10:30?
let's do 10:30, and we're going to jump into the recommendations a little quicker and get out of here sooner so everybody can get on with their afternoon, all right? 10:30, everybody back here ready to go. You should have copies of the revised recommendations at your table spot. Wanted to make sure everybody had those and had a chance to take a peek.
Did you pick up everything I said?
Right on top, yeah.
Did you hear me on my side conversation? Okay.
All right, we got just a couple folks coming in. Hey, so make sure if you haven't already done so, you take a look at the evaluation sheet that's in the front of your binder. That's a really huge help on identifying. Honestly, the more information you can provide us, the better. On what presentations were good, what you liked about them, what presentations you would have liked to have seen slightly different, on how the tour went. I'm sure you want to big kudos to James and Heather and Frederica on how things have gone for them. Running the event. And of course, Delisa.
I don't. This side conversation.
Man, yeah. You don't have an evaluation?
I've got it right here.
Is it in?
Oh,
It's in
the
the.
sliding pocket.
It's in the pocket in the front.
Okay.
Moderator
Thank you.
needs not to pick
I
on
had it turned
certain
over so I wouldn't take up so much room on the table.
Last page.
Very back.
Thank you, got it.
Number 12, I just wrote moderator.
Perfect. What's the question? What I enjoyed least. Nice. That's fair. That's fair. I can't say I blame you. Why are you laughing, Heather? Oh my goodness, you're the worst. Man, harassment from the side.
Heather, I could say YouTube operator.
YouTube. So for those of you that weren't aware, when Dave was rallying his support on YouTube, his viewership went from 1 viewer to 2. So he has doubled his followers and is trending up at a... So if you want to get in on this early...
He's got 2 phones.
100%
Got 2 what?
He's got 2 phones.
2 phones?
Both him.
It works. That works. It's a numbers game.
Yeah.
It's all a numbers game. It's all in volume.
Remember The Office? Like when
That's it.
Andy Bernard did it in The Office, and he kept writing comments. I was like, this guy says I'm great.
All right. So let's take a second and, all right. So we want to thank the folks that took home the homework last night and made corrections, amendments, additions, edits, changes to these recommendations. I owe you a small apology. In the midst of getting the changes to the written recommendation, we did not add the 3 paragraphs at the end of the recommendation that we said we were going to on the printed copy. I get a C-, right? Show that on your evaluation form. We do have it on the electronic copy that will be projected up, so you can see what it's going to look like, and we can read through that and make sure you're okay. But on the printed copy you have, it does not reflect those 3 paragraphs being added, but that's okay. It's boilerplate, like a letterhead. That's what we're going with.
I like that.
That makes it sound like it's not my fault. It was intentional. All right. Recommendation number 1. Susan, you want to talk to us about the changes you guys made
Sure.
and thoughts and where we're going?
Yep.
Everybody have that pulled up? Recommendation number 1? Okay.
Okay. We didn't make, I'm trying to think. We did not make any changes in the background. It was pretty short and was well understood by the department, so we didn't make any changes. The changes at the bottom, hopefully you have your old copy with you, and we used the kind of verbiage after talking with the representative from DOE, Linda Sartori, is that the name?
Santoro.
Satora. She was incredibly helpful. Excuse me. So the changes removed, rather than identify specific milestones, you can see that the verbiage was changed to create a complex-wide, consistently applied data dictionary rather than specific milestones, because some people use different kinds of milestones, so it should be applied all the way. The inconsistency in not applying causes confusion, and those were the changes that were made, and the kind of verbiage that was clear to the department as well as us. Well, sure, I didn't cough all day. Doggone, excuse me. Okay, in the second recommendation, we took out that last line because it really wasn't that germane to it. It was just something I put in because I liked it. And we changed the milestone information, the second line beginning, milestone information should contain the rationale for identifying the level of the milestone. That was changed to the type of milestone based on the data dictionary.
Line of the recommendation, number 1, it should be not instead of note.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I want you to know I typed the correction, so I have to take blame for this.
All right. Are there thoughts on where we stand with this recommendation? Yes. Steve Rosenbaum.
Just another grammar correction or editing note on number 2, where it says there's a start of a parentheses, but no end parentheses based on the data dictionary of milestones. So it's missing a clause, or it needs to be taken out.
So where's that supposed to go?
Just take out the paren, right?
Take it out? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right.
Oh, and we did add the word advanced, because there may be occasions when milestones are advanced, not always delayed or postponed.
How do we feel about this recommendation? Are we pretty close on this one? Anybody have any heartache or issue? Now again, Heather, if you can scroll on down, sorry, you can see that they added the boilerplate language at the bottom. It's not formatted like the rest because we pulled it over from PDF, but we'll get that squared away. And it'll look nice and pretty when you get it to go forward with. But any additional thoughts or discussion on this?
Will that paragraph have a header like background or something like that?
Would you like for it to?
I think it should, otherwise it'll kind of stick out.
Okay.
And somebody will ask, well, what is this here for?
Is background the right word, or is there what's the right word?
Wow. I want to see something SSAB.
Dave?
I think on the other paper we had who we are. It's just
Oh, I think that's good.
Does that feel
That
good?
makes sense. Yeah, that really makes sense.
Okay. Any additional thoughts or comments on this?
I mean, I assume we'll clean up the front end so it deletes draft recommendation
Yes.
and the
Yeah,
others,
all that will
and
be taken care of.
cleaned up.
Okay. Does anyone foresee any issues taking this recommendation back to their board before we?
I hope. Yeah, I'm hopeful. It certainly speaks to our values for transparency, so I'm always hopeful those 32 seats will let me sign it.
All right. Seeing no other discussion, giving you a chance here. All right, let's go. We're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down from each board on whether you're comfortable taking this back, and we'll clear it through the chairs. So, Savannah River, good? Good. Portsmouth, yes. Paducah? Oak Ridge? Oh, look at you guys going. Yes?
It's a wave.
I like it. There we go.
Yeah.
Well done. Hey, nice job, guys. Good work. It is not insignificant to find something that we can all agree on, and that's a big deal. All right. Recommendation number 2.
Okay. Am I on?
keep talking, we'll fix it.
Keep talking?
Yes, ma'am.
It might help.
Have that one line because it's.
Probably.
There we go.
It's just that I'm pointing this way. Okay, so we worked through changes to be much more specific, and starting in the first numbered recommendation, we changed from radioactive waste material to hazardous waste material. So the word hazardous has been added. In the recommendation bullets, you're going to see changes that speak to verbiage that came right out of the NAS report that says that a portion of the technology development effort for DOE-EM cleanup should focus on breakthrough solutions and technologies that can substantially reduce cleanup costs, schedules, and uncertainties. So we spoke very directly to their recommendation to DOE-EM. The third bullet recommends exploring already developed and usable computer platforms. So that moved up in numbering. We took the verbiage that came underneath that and moved it down to number 4 as an opening paragraph about the culture and process of contracting that we feel must be changed. So that's now under number 4, and 4 is renumbered. Actually, I guess it's the same, huh?
Yep.
Yes. And lastly, the 6th bullet is one that we really need to talk about. It's removed and hopefully will be.
I noticed that it's still in.
Okay.
So if we're going to keep it in, I need a definition to bring back with me.
Okay.
Where is that?
It's in the first recommendation, and it's in the 5th paragraph on the 2nd page. Hyphenated word, cross-cutting.
I thought Susan recommended changing it to cross-complex.
Unknown.
I'm comfortable with that, cross-complex. How do folks feel?
Cross what?
Cross-complex or cross-site?
Right.
Is that a word that's easy or better for you, Frank? Cross-complex, or is that still?
It's more easily understood,
Okay.
I think, but
By our audience,
Yes.
who we're sending it to, they talk about the complex. That's the whole complex.
I would suggest we go with cross-complex. How do folks feel?
Stan, you're studying. Are you okay with that?
Well, common.
Excuse me?
If we mean that that sites share a problem, and that's what we call a common problem. So is that what we mean? They
Yes.
are problems that are common to various sites, to integrate decisions that are common across sites. Frank, does that work for you?
that's even better.
You
Do
can almost
do you
just
even need the
replace
adjective?
cross-cutting with common.
You just say identify remediation needs from site to site? Oh, it doesn't matter, I don't.
All right, can we change that to common and see how it looks? And I think just common.
No,
Just
no, no,
common.
just common.
Just common.
I would like to suggest one deletion in the first paragraph, since we,
Hold that one second.
Okay.
Also, the word cross-cutting was in the 5th paragraph of the 2nd recommendation.
2nd page.
2nd page, 5th paragraph of the 2nd page.
That's where that was. Recommendation 1.
Recommendation 1. Go back up to
Oh, here it is.
bold 1. Third last line on the end. There you go.
That's the first one.
Yes, please.
Yes.
All right, Stan, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
well, no, excuse me. But above that, in the first paragraph, since we deleted the word radiological because it's not the only risk, I would suggest in that first paragraph the next to last line, delete radiological. In the first paragraph of the background section.
Radioactive.
Yeah, just reducing risk.
Just eliminate the word radiological, because we're talking about
Okay.
risk in general.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
All right. Yes, ma'am, please. Steve?
Yeah. After removing the word radiological in the paragraph there, when we talked about it yesterday, I was asking in recommendation 1, hazardous waste. It was an and instead of a replacement of radiological, because primarily we're talking about radiological and hazardous waste as the byproduct. So I just didn't want to see that go away.
Okay, so Steve is thinking instead of simplifying this to just risk and hazardous, that we would be better off placing hazardous and radiological risk at both of those previous locations, just as a clarifying point. Thoughts? Is it a significant change? Do we need to? Susan indicated she'd be okay with making that change. Is anyone significantly opposed to that?
I can live with it either way.
To me, risk is just broader because that includes safety issues as well that could be part of the problem.
No, not necessarily talking about in the paragraph itself. I'm talking about in recommendation number 1.
In the recommendation.
Okay, the recommendation. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah.
No, let's figure out where we're at.
Well, excuse me, the better way to say that, if we wanted to do it, would be the reduction of radiological and other hazardous waste material. That would
Exactly.
I think
That's
that
what I
would be
was
the
thinking.
best way to say it.
All right. Did you catch that, Heather? Reduction of radiological and other hazardous waste. And? So Heather, you've been doing this for 2 months? And she's quickly learning the worst part of this job is typing in public. Right?
It is.
But words mean something.
It had been such a promising career until.
And on that same sentence.
Yes, sir.
Right after A, it says identify, pursue, should be identify and pursue development.
Yes, it should.
And,
Third
Under
sentence
A.
down,
Under A, yeah.
under A.
to A,
After the word identity.
middle of that paragraph. Right there. Yep. Should be identify and pursue. Right above where your cursor is. Perfect. If you
Thank
could just
you.
read my mind, this would be so much easier. Right. All right. Other thoughts on this recommendation? Are there any other significant edits or changes we need to make? Insignificant edits or changes? How comfortable are you taking this back to your board? Does everybody have a sense of comfort? Any further discussion we need to have on this? All right, we're going to follow the same process and kind of go around the table and see if everyone's okay. So we're going to start over here with Savannah River. They're good. Portsmouth, Paducah? You good? Yeah. Oak Ridge? Hanford? We're done.
There we go.
Boom. Under budget, ahead of schedule.
Where's lunch?
Nice job, everyone.
Hey, you guys are great.
Awesome, that's good. Everybody did
And again, this will have that same who we are boilerplate at the bottom. And
good. When you design that boilerplate, italic or something that's always the same,
shiny gold lame.
That's always in.
Make it pop.
I like that.
it will make them look at it.
Let's add some photos and illustrations.
Says the
That's what happens
design
when you bring a graphic
graphics.
designer. I'm like, I don't care for this type.
All right, as we start to wrap up, final thoughts from you guys. Susan.
I want to thank, this is something that we have a passion for, and I want to thank everybody. I love the idea that we can sit around a table, we can disagree, but we can come to common ground, we can do it civilly, and there's such a level of respect around here. And I especially want to call out Victoria. I have not had a chance to talk to her or actually meet her in person. I'm glad to see somebody under 50 at the table, frankly, because many of us,
Oh my goodness, Gil.
under 40, shall we say.
Oh my goodness. What's up, old man?
No Christmas card for you.
Oh, darn. And we all are very cognizant of the fact that we need to pass on this information that we have to younger generations and get them interested, because some of the contamination at our sites will be there in perpetuity, and we understand that, and I'm really glad to see that kind of participation. And thank you, and thanks to everybody.
Are we going around the table? Is that the-
Sure, we got a few minutes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sure. I want to thank Dave. You really support us well.
Yes.
And with the phone calls and, yeah.
Are you waiting for your cut?
Oh, yeah, it should be. This is on
100% it'll
YouTube.
happen.
You bet. And Eric, thanks for all,
Sure.
as always,
Yes.
for running the show here. It always goes well.
Yeah, Eric did an amazing job. I really want
Yeah.
Frank, anything you want to throw in?
Just echo the thanks for all the hard work by everyone involved, and
Yeah.
I don't want to extend the day any further.
I understand. Steve, anything?
Ditto.
Did it.
Well, I certainly want to join my colleagues in thanking you all for such a very good set of meetings, and to the Savannah River folks for a great tour. And it's been a very transparent and open meeting, but there has been one mystery that I would like to clear up at this point, and that is to ask Victoria what she has been knitting.
It's a money-making
what color I'll have
event.
'em
Dave's
for our
YouTubing,
color
she's
meeting.
knitting. Trilby, anything you want to share?
Well, I think Victoria needs to put her beanies on YouTube. Thank you, everyone. It was a great meeting. Thanks for Savannah River. You have a beautiful, beautiful setting here. And thanks for Dave for keeping us, making sure that we all have our phone calls and know what's going on, and Eric and all the staff. Thank you for everybody.
Dennis?
I'd also like to thank everyone, without going down the total list. I also, and a key aspect is I'm terming off, so this will be the last meeting. It's been enjoyable. The last 3 years have been just wonderful. Eye-opening, great learning experience, so thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Bill?
Hope to see y'all in Idaho. I have a cruise that starts November 1, so I'll have to see whether or not I can work it in.
Victoria? No longer a rookie, by the way.
No,
Being-
yeah, this is my first meeting.
Hardcore
I've
veteran.
survived. I've been on the cab for 3 or 4 years now, and I am amazed at how much I continue to learn. And I have definitely learned a whole lot this last meeting. I feel like I need to go home and let my brain rest a little bit.
I really enjoyed this meeting. It's one of the best ones I've been to. It went smoothly. The only thing I wish we could have had Ann White here, but I understand she had to be somewhere else for a meeting, and Mr. Gilbertson did a great job filling in for her. But this has been a really smooth, enjoyable experience.
Good deal. Thanks, Bob. Carlton?
Yes, as always.
Fashion model.
As always, I enjoy sitting around this table with this group of people that display such a passion for what they're doing here as volunteers. And the level of expertise and knowledge that they share and that I bring back from each and every last one of these fine people around this table. So I'm just glad to be here once again.
Thanks, Carl. Oh, man, Allensworth? Gil, I'm sorry. Gil?
Thank you all for coming to Augusta. And when I think of these meetings and what we do around the table, we have conversations, we disagree. But nights like last night or during the break, that's where I like these meetings the most, where we can sit down and talk and learn a little bit about each other and learn about what goes on in our neck of the woods. And so I always look forward to talking to Susan and Shelley and Dennis. I'm going to miss you. I mean, I mean, I didn't know you were turning off, so I'm sad. But though I like the interaction that we share, and I do appreciate that we can talk to each other even though we may disagree, because I'm not disagreeable at all.
Doug?
How much time do I have? Well, I'd like to thank my mom and dad, because without them, I would not be here. But no, in reality, I would like to thank everyone, Dave, Eric, our great staff, James and his folks, because your support and your interest in what you do. So God bless you all, and have a safe trip home.
That's awesome. Hey, Doug, that's really interesting you said that they were like a rolling rock band, because they are loading up their van, I guess, tonight, and then rolling out for Monday meetings. But James was telling me that the cab groupies were outstanding. That's why he loved the job. Thanks, guys. 4 recommendations, right? We rolled one into the other 2, passed 2. The 4th one's going to become a presentation, which is a big deal. You guys took on some tough issues and really represented your communities well. And Dennis, man, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. Gonna miss you. It's what stinks about term limits. Hey, if you've got your evaluations, make sure you spend a few minutes, fill those out. You can bring those up to me. Boss?
Well, I just want to say, just so you know, your job's not done, is now you need to bring these recommendations to your boards. I'm going to do my best to get it to, especially for Savannah River, because we're meeting on Monday, tomorrow. So you can have it and present it to your boards. I offer myself, if you need any help explaining the recommendations to your boards, I'm happy to call in and kind of walk your boards through it. And just, if you find yourself at a board meeting and you're not voting on the recommendation, talk to your DDFO and have them vote on the recommendation, because we've last time we did this, we got them out in record time. I got them to EM1 within like 2.5 months of us having a meeting, and it worked out really well. So I'm hoping to do that again.
And we got a really quick response from her, too.
Yeah.
It was really great.
Worked out really well. So thanks again for everyone. And,
Staff meeting.
For the staff who's sticking around, we're going to start a little bit early so we can get everyone out early, because people have to get on the road. So we'll just meet in this room, and then we'll have lunch coming in early. At noon, yes, don't worry, I can talk for a long time, James.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
We do a group picture? Where would you like them?
No, I'm just asking if you guys want to take a picture together, all together as SSAB.
Why don't we take a picture out there and say Augusta National's behind us?
Outside or just against the wall?
Against the wall.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Drop the gavel and let's do a photo.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Great meeting.